There are weeks in Genoa City when secrets simply simmer beneath polished smiles and expensive promises. And then there are weeks when every lie begins to breathe, every betrayal starts to move, and every wounded heart becomes dangerous. This is one of those weeks. Nothing stays buried for long when pride, revenge, and desperation all collide at once, and what begins as quiet tension quickly mutates into something far uglier. Old lovers return carrying unfinished pain. Powerful men adjust their strategies with cold precision. Sons spiral toward ruin while brothers chase control they no longer truly possess. Women who were once underestimated become impossible to contain. And beneath all of it is the same poisonous force that has always ruled this world, the need to win, even when winning destroys the last fragile piece of what used to be love. From Genoa City to Las Vegas, the pressure keeps building until nearly everyone is forced into a corner where dignity no longer matters. Forgiveness feels like weakness, and survival demands choices that leave permanent scars. Lily's return to Genoa City does not feel like a homecoming. It feels like the reopening of a wound that never healed correctly. The moment she steps back into the city, the emotional temperature shifts because her presence brings unfinished business, old grief, and a truth that Kane is no longer willing to soften for her sake. Whatever tenderness may still exist between them has been layered over with resentment, mistrust, and the bitter memory of manipulation. Kane has spent too long living with the image of danger hanging over Lily and their children, too long believing that fear had justified the chaos around him, and now he is forced to confront the possibility that the panic he carried was part of a larger game. That realization cuts deeper than simple anger. It humiliates him. It makes him feel handled, reduced, and played by the very woman whose judgment he once trusted more than his own. For Lily, the emotional burden is just as heavy, but hers is tangled with rationalization. She knows what she did cannot be made clean. She knows helping Victor in any capacity stains her, yet she keeps reaching for the same defense. Kane had gone too far. Kane had made himself impossible to trust. Kane had pushed everyone around him to the point where desperate action felt necessary. The problem is that such reasoning may explain her choice, but it does not erase it. That is what makes the reunion between Lily and Kane so volatile. Neither of them stands on moral high ground anymore. Neither of them can look at the other without also seeing their own failure reflected back. Kane is furious not only because Lily crossed a line, but because some part of him knows he helped create the emotional landscape that made such betrayal possible. Lily is defensive not only because she wants to survive judgment, but because she fears the possibility that Kane may be right to condemn her. Between them sits a broken history that still has warmth inside it, which is precisely what makes it so dangerous. If they hated each other cleanly, walking away would be simple. Instead, they are trapped in that far more painful territory, where hurt still coexists with memory, where forgiveness remains imaginable even when it feels undeserved. That fragile possibility turns every look, every pause, every encounter into a psychological battle. Neither wants to be the first to bend. Neither wants to admit that the other still matters. Yet every step they take around one another suggests that the war between them is not over because the connection itself is not dead. Victor, meanwhile, watches this emotional wreckage with the patience of a man who has built his life on knowing exactly when to tighten pressure and when to shift tactics. He understands that brute force is not always the most effective weapon. Sometimes the better move is to let guilt ripen, to let fractured loyalties turn inward, to let wounded people destroy their own defenses. If his previous strategy with Kane relied on intimidation and entanglement, his new one is quieter and therefore more dangerous. Victor begins adapting, probing for weaknesses not through loud threats but through strategic absences, carefully timed information, and the manipulation of personal pride. He knows Kane is too proud to appear shaken, too stubborn to accept defeat gracefully, and too emotionally compromised where Lily is concerned. Victor also knows Lily herself may no longer be as controllable as before. That uncertainty pushes him toward a colder style of warfare. Rather than relying entirely on what Lily may still do for him, he starts building a separate path to neutralize Kane, one that does not depend on anyone's affection and therefore cannot be derailed by conscience. The more Victor senses instability in everyone around him, the more dangerous he becomes, because instability is the terrain where he thrives. Elsewhere, Billy stands on the edge of a different kind of reckoning. His instinct is always to push forward, to bluff through humiliation, to treat emotional injury as something that can be outrun with momentum. Yet Sally's influence forces him into an unfamiliar posture. Reflection. The prospect of going to London to face Jill is not just about repairing a strained mother-son relationship. It is about confronting the deeper truth that Billy's endless rebellion has cost him more than pride will allow him to admit. There is a childlike ache buried under his bravado, a persistent hunger to be understood and accepted without conditions, and that ache has shaped too many of his worst decisions. Sally sees enough of that truth to push him toward the meeting, but even she cannot fully protect him from what his absence might trigger. Billy's choice to step away from Genoa City, even briefly, creates a power vacuum, and in this world emptiness never stays empty for long. While he is gone, others begin calculating what can be taken, reshaped, or attacked. That possibility hangs heavily over Sally and Audra. Both women know that being connected to Billy, to business ambition, and to a deal involving Newman Media places them within Victor's orbit whether they welcome it or not. The planned acquisition tied to Spectra Charles Media is no ordinary business maneuver. It is a battlefield disguised as corporate strategy, and everyone involved understands that the numbers on paper hide deeply personal stakes. For Sally, the risk is emotional as much as professional. She has invested herself in the idea that building something meaningful with Billy might finally move her beyond the cycle of chaos that has defined too much of her past. But she also knows better than most that Victor never attacks only the deal. He attacks the insecurities, histories, and vulnerabilities of the people attached to it. Audra, by contrast, is less sentimental and more openly strategic, but that does not make her safe. Her confidence can harden into arrogance, and arrogance is exactly the sort of opening Victor loves to exploit. If Billy leaves town at the wrong moment, Sally and Audra may find themselves not merely defending a business plan, but fighting to avoid becoming collateral in a larger power play designed to remind everyone that Victor still controls the board. In Las Vegas, the atmosphere turns darker, more intimate, and far less predictable. Adam steps into a maze where desire, manipulation, guilt, and danger keep feeding one another until even he has trouble distinguishing instinct from self-destruction. Riza keeps pushing him, not always directly, but with the sort of calculated emotional pressure that destabilizes a man who already carries too much internal conflict. Adam has always been at his most dangerous when he feels cornered, and at his most reckless when he believes pain is inevitable anyway. Around Riza, those two impulses merge. The kiss between them was not just a lapse. It was evidence of how vulnerable Adam remains to provocation when his emotional defenses crack. He knows what it means for Chelsea. He knows betrayal does not become smaller just because it stops short of full physical disaster. Yet instead of pulling back cleanly, he keeps drifting closer to the line, partly out of obsession, partly out of curiosity, and partly because some damaged part of him still equates chaos with honesty. Calm has never sat naturally on Adam's shoulders. Conflict feels more familiar, almost more deserved. That inner fracture becomes even more dangerous when Nick's downward spiral sharpens into something impossible to ignore. What begins as concern quickly curdles into fear when Adam realizes Nick may be using fentanyl. The discovery hits with a mix of fury and horror, because beneath their rivalry there remains a bond neither brother can fully erase. Adam knows how fragile control can be. He knows how quickly denial can turn into collapse. At first, the knowledge awakens protectiveness, but almost immediately, that instinct gets contaminated by old resentment. Nick has always been the brother who seems stronger, steadier, more socially acceptable, more easily forgiven. Seeing him unravel should inspire compassion, yet it also ignites a darker reaction in Adam, one he hates in himself. The bitter recognition that even Nick is not untouchable. Even Nick can rot from the inside. Even Nick can become weak. That reaction disgusts Adam precisely because it is real. It forces him to confront how much competition still lives underneath his concern. When he finally confronts the situation, he is not simply reacting to drug use. He is reacting to the collapse of an image, to the realization that the family's emotional center may be far more unstable than anyone wants to admit. Matt's shadow looms over all of it. The possibility that Riza is being used as bait gives every Vegas interaction a sinister undertone. Nothing feels accidental anymore. No flirtation, no test, no provocation can be trusted at face value once the possibility of Matt's involvement becomes impossible to dismiss. If he is orchestrating events from the edges, then Adam and Nick are not merely making mistakes, they are being guided toward precisely the sort of emotional and moral disarray that will make them easier to break. That is what makes Matt so threatening. He does not need brute force when he can weaponize people's appetites, shame, and desperation. The Newman men are especially vulnerable because each of them carries an ego strong enough to ignore warning signs and a history messy enough to be used against them. Noah's impulsive decision to provoke Matt adds another layer of instability. What begins as frustration quickly becomes a challenge, and beneath Noah's boldness is the emotional hunger of a man who is tired of being treated like an observer in his own family's crises. Reaching out to Matt is reckless, but it also reveals something raw in Noah, a need to prove courage, relevance, and control. He wants the confrontation because he believes clarity will come from direct impact, yet he underestimates how much someone like Matt can manipulate the terms of engagement. If a response comes, and if it lures Noah to Las Vegas, then he is no longer chasing truth. He is stepping willingly into a stage-managed disaster. Sienna's likely involvement only intensifies the danger. Her jealousy, instincts, and emotional investment ensure that she cannot remain detached. And once she enters the chaos, every conflict gains another unpredictable witness. Las Vegas becomes more than a location. It becomes a pressure chamber where pride, addiction, seduction, and vengeance all compress into something explosive. Back in Genoa City, Mariah faces a more private but no less devastating collapse. The decision to consider a plea deal tied to treatment rather than prison is, on the surface, practical. It may even be the smartest path available, but emotionally it feels like surrender, and Mariah has never handled the idea of surrender well when it threatens her identity. To accept treatment in place of incarceration is to admit that something inside her has fractured badly enough to require containment. It is to let other people define her condition, label her instability, and institutionalize her pain. Even if it saves her from a harsher outcome, it still comes with shame. Worse than the legal implications is the domestic fallout. Tessa is no longer simply a partner waiting patiently on the sidelines. She has become a living reminder of everything Mariah stands to lose. Love, in that context, becomes unbearable because it shines too harshly on failure. The more Mariah senses Tessa's hurt and uncertainty, the harder it becomes to imagine repair. Their marriage begins to feel like one more thing she has contaminated, one more sanctuary she entered with good intentions and then filled with damage. That emotional isolation makes Mariah brittle. Every compassionate gesture risks feeling like pity. Every practical conversation sounds like quiet judgment. She wants redemption, but she cannot yet picture what a redeemed version of herself would even look like. So she hovers in that agonizing space between consequence and hope, punishing herself before anyone else gets the chance. That inner war may not explode as publicly as the conflicts consuming the Newman orbit, but it is no less intense. In some ways it is worse, because it lacks the release of open combat. Mariah's battlefield is internal, and internal battles can last longer than anyone outside them realizes. Then there is Patty, whose return sends a tremor through Genoa City, because memory alone is enough to unsettle almost everyone who sees her. Patty does not need to do much at first. Her existence in familiar spaces is provocative enough. She carries history like a lit match, and no one knows whether she will burn down only herself or take others with her. Most of the city responds to her reappearance with dread, suspicion, or outright hostility, but Patty has always possessed an unnerving ability to slip past conventional expectations. Even when she is unwelcome, she finds openings. Even when people brace for madness, she can momentarily present something softer, stranger, and more disarming than anticipated. That is what makes her so difficult to handle. She refuses to stay fixed in the role others assign her. If she begins forming unexpected connections, those bonds will not necessarily make her safer. They may simply give her new emotional leverage, new reasons to act, and new ways to insert herself into lives already under strain. As all of these threads tighten at once, the week becomes defined not by one single scandal but by an entire ecosystem of emotional warfare. Lily and Kane stand at the edge of either reconciliation or mutually assured destruction. Victor recalibrates with the cold focus of a man who sees pain as a useful tool. Billy tries to do the right thing only to risk leaving his allies exposed. Sally and Audra brace for a corporate attack that may turn painfully personal. Adam slips deeper into temptation and fury, while Nick spirals toward a crisis that could shatter the family's fragile balance. Noah charges toward danger with more nerve than caution, and Sienna may follow him straight into the fire. Mariah struggles under the weight of consequence, and Patty returns like a ghost no one invited but no one can ignore. By the end of it, what makes the chaos so compelling is not simply the scale of the conflict, but the painful humanity buried inside every bad decision. These are not people falling apart because fate has singled them out unfairly. They are falling apart because old wounds were never truly healed, because pride kept replacing honesty, because the need to control became stronger than the need to love well, and because in Genoa City, weakness is treated like a sin until it mutates into something monstrous. That is why this stretch feels so combustible. Everyone is carrying too much anger, too much regret, too much unfinished grief, and when that much emotional fuel gathers in one place, it only takes one spark for everything to go up at once.